The 6th of June, 1944. Allied infantry and armored divisions begin landing on the Normandy coast in France. This largest seaborne invasion in history marks a turning point in World War II and becomes the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. On the following month, in July 1944, the Soviet forces liberate Majdanek, the first major Nazi camp, located in German-occupied Poland. As Allied and Soviet troops move across Europe against Nazi Germany in 1944 and 1945, they encounter concentration camps, mass graves, and other sites of Nazi crimes. The unspeakable conditions the liberators confront shed light on the full scope of Nazi horrors. The following three criminals belong to the most infamous perpetrators of the criminal Nazi regime, who are responsible for atrocities beyond one's imagination. Number 1. Otto Moll. Otto Moll joined the SS in 1936 after having graduated from the professional gardening school. Maul was musically active and became a member of the SS marching band. However, during a journey with his marching band, the SS truck collided with a car and Maul was critically injured. He was treated in hospital for several months, suffering from a fractured skull and losing an eye. It is believed that his brain was damaged too, and as a result, he became a physically and mentally ill person whom the Nazis deliberately exploited as a murderer. Maul's concentration camp career began at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where he worked from 1938 until May 1941, when he and his wife and two daughters arrived in the Auschwitz concentration camp, located in German-occupied Poland. Many former Auschwitz prisoners described Otto Moll as the worst SS man in the entire camp. He distinguished himself with a particular sadism towards the prisoners, and because he had a glass eye, he had the nickname Cyclops. He held various positions within the camp, and after the expansion of Auschwitz into an extermination camp ordered by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, Moll devoted himself primarily to the killing of people. In 1941, the 4 large crematoria and gas chambers in Auschwitz-Birkenau went into operation. The process of selection and murder was carefully planned and organized. When a train stopped at the platform, the arrivals were lined up into 2 columns, men and boys in one, women and girls in the other. The SS physicians such as Josef Mengele performed a selection. The only criterion was the appearance of the prisoners, whose fate, for labor or for death, was determined at will. The veteran prisoners gathered the belongings of the new arrivals in an area known as Canada, which consisted of several barracks which were used to store the stolen belongings of the prisoners. Trucks carried those too infirm to walk, and the rest marched. Before entering the gas chambers, people were ordered to disrobe. On one occasion, the truck full of prisoners was being driven to a gas chamber, but turned so suddenly that a woman's child, about 3 years old, fell out. Otto Moll, who was driving behind the truck, took the child by the neck and then by the leg and smashed his head against a guardhouse wall, killing him on the spot. Then, Moll drove up to the truck and threw the child's lifeless corpse to his mother. However, smashing children into concrete walls in front of their mothers was only one of Moll's specialties. For his merits in killing innocent men, women and children, Hitler decorated Moll with a War Merit Cross, first class with swords, on the 20th of April, 1943. This casts a significant light on his importance in the extermination of Jews. From September 1943 to May 1944, Moll was the first commandant of the Fürstengrube and Gleiwitz I, which were Auschwitz subcamps. In May 1944, he returned to the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, where he was appointed to the head of all crematoria by the camp's commandant, Rudolf Höss. During this period, the extermination of Hungarian Jews was to take place. Moll was aware of the fact that the planned 10,000 to 15,000 corpses per day would overwhelm the crematoria's ovens. So just before the arrival of the Hungarian transports, Moll ordered fire pits to be dug alongside the crematoria, which he provided with a guttering system of his own design. In this way, fat burning from the corpses could be drained off, collected, picked up by the inmates with buckets, and tipped into the flames to burn. The SS man kept the people fated to die, unaware of what awaited them. In his speeches to the new arrivals, Moll repeated that they were being sent to the camp where work was waiting for them, but first they had to undergo disinfection and bathe. Moll told them politely to hang their clothes on the hooks, take a shower, and even promised they would be provided with soup and tea or coffee. However, they were taken into the gas chambers, locked in, and killed with Zyklon B gas. Maul often strolled through the crowd of arrivals scheduled for gassing, observed them undressing, and lured small children away from their mothers with sweets, in order to throw them outside into the boiling fat of the fire pits. On a few occasions, he was seen picking children up by their hair and then holding them suspended while he shot them. Sometimes, there were so many incoming transports that the gas chambers were incapable of containing all the new arrivals. The excess people were generally shot, one at a time, often by Maul himself, or by other SS men, especially Erich Musfeld. When some people asked Maul to spare their life, he replied, "An order is an order," and killed them without any remorse. The Jews were shot in the back of their head and dropped into the fire. It sometimes happened that the prisoners put up a fight or children cried. As a punishment, Maul would throw them into the burning fire pits alive. Even among the SS men, Maul was notorious for his cruelty and hatred towards the Jews, especially women and children. When he did not throw the children into the fire alive, he would kick them to death with a smile on his face. The prisoners did not consider him a human and would call him Schweinemetzger, which meant pig butcher. Maul often led attractive Jewish women to the edge of the fire pits to enjoy their fear. He would whisper lewd words into their ears, then shoot them in the back of the head and drop them into the fire. Another of Maul's specialties was setting his dog on naked women. The dog would bound towards them in a rage, chasing them towards the fire pits while biting and snapping at their legs and buttocks. Maul would then shoot the poor women in their stomach so that they would fall over and watch them burn to death. The fire pits were also used for smaller groups of victims, consisting of up to 200 people, as the use of poison gas for such a small number was considered uneconomical and therefore a waste. The Hungarian children, as well as the sick, old and disabled people, were driven by truck to the fire pits by Maul or colleagues, who had been instructed to shoot them by hand or throw them alive into the flames. During 8 weeks from the 15th of May to the 9th of July 1944, Hungarian gendarmerie officials, under the guidance of the German SS officials, deported around 424,000 Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where upon arrival and after selection, SS functionaries killed the majority of them in gas chambers. As the head of all crematoria, Maul also directed the work of the Jewish Sonderkommando, which was a unit of camp's prisoners forced to help with the disposal of gas chamber victims. Those who refused to do the terrible work of the Sonderkommando, Maul would personally throw alive into the burning furnaces. On one occasion, when he found jewelry in the possession of one of the members of the Jewish Sonderkommando, he poured gasoline over him and set him on fire. Maul was also known for being a great marksman, and when he felt that the prisoners from the Sonderkommando were not working properly, he would shoot them from considerable distances. Among Maul's many sadistic specialties also included beating people with clubs and iron bars, or throwing them against electric fences. In mid-January 1945, as Soviet forces approached the Auschwitz concentration camp complex, the SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its subcamps. SS units forced nearly 60,000 prisoners to march west from the Auschwitz camp system. Prisoners suffered from the cold weather, starvation, and exposure on these marches. Otto Moll led one such death march, and in February 1945 arrived in Kaufering, which was the common name of a system of 11 subcamps of the Dachau concentration camp system. The conditions in Kaufering were horrible. The prisoners deported to each of the 11 subcamps had to construct the accommodation themselves. The resulting huts, partially buried for camouflage from aerial reconnaissance, were completely inadequate for the weather conditions. Rain and snow leaked through the earthen roofs, and vermin infested the huts. Prisoners had to sleep on straw that had been spread on the floor. What little food the prisoners did have was taken by the SS guards, and those who were sick were fed even less. There were even incidents of cannibalism, and some prisoners were so desperate to escape from their horrible reality that they would try to commit suicide by throwing themselves into the electrical fencing. At Kaufering, Maul abused and killed prisoners, as well as willfully neglecting their care. During Kaufering camp's existence, between June 1944 and April 1945, 15,000 out of 30,000 prisoners died from hunger, disease, executions, or during death marches. A few days before the subcamps of Kaufering were liberated, between the 24th and 27th of April 1945, by the 7th United States Army, Otto Moll had forced prisoners on a death march to the Dachau concentration camp. During this death march, he was involved in the shooting of at least 120 Russian prisoners who were too weak or sick to continue marching any further. Maul himself shot 26 of them. In the end, Otto Moll finally paid for his crimes. In November 1945, after he was arrested, Moll was tried at the first Dachau trial, which was held within the compound of the former Dachau concentration camp. On the 13th of December 1945, the US military tribunal found Otto Moll, then 31 years old, guilty of fatally shooting 26 prisoners who had collapsed from exhaustion during the death march from Kaufering, and sentenced him to death by hanging. However, Moll's crimes at Auschwitz were not part of the indictment, and he was never prosecuted for them. He was executed in Landsberg prison on the 28th of May, 1946. There were no tears shed for Otto Moll. Number 2. Oskar Dirlewanger. After the outbreak of World War I, Oskar Dirlewanger took part in the German invasion of Belgium and later fought in France. He was wounded 6 times, received the Iron Cross Second and First Class, and in November 1918, at the time of Germany's surrender, he held the rank of lieutenant. The front experiences, however, had a damaging effect on Dirlewanger's personality. When the First World War ended on the 11th of November 1918, Oskar Dirlewanger was described as a mentally unstable, violent fanatic, and alcoholic. People with such personality traits were top candidates for the Nazi Party and SA, which Oskar Dirlewanger joined in 1923. However, Dirlewanger was also a pedophile and a rapist. In 1934, 1 year after Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party came into power, he raped a 13-year-old girl from the League of German Girls, which was the female section of Hitler Youth. He was also convicted of driving and damaging a government vehicle under the influence of alcohol. As a result, he lost his doctorate in political science, was expelled from the Nazi Party and SA, and sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment. After his release between 1936 and 1939, he fought in the Condor Legion, which was the German military unit sent to Spain to support General Franco's nationalist movement during the Spanish Civil War. It was a great opportunity for Nazi Germany to test and develop methods of strategic bombing, which were soon after used during the Second World War. Dirlewanger was wounded 3 times, and after his return, he was again allowed to join the Nazi Party and regained his doctorate. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, and in July 1940, Dirlewanger was admitted to the SS. He created and trained a special criminal unit named the Dirlewanger Brigade, which at the beginning consisted mostly of convicted poachers. They were recruited thanks to their tracking and shooting skills to fight partisans. Later, his unit recruited mostly convicted German criminals. At first, his unit was sent to Nazi-occupied Poland, where Dirlewanger became a commandant of a camp at Stary Dzikov, which was set up for Jewish slave labor. They committed atrocities here, as well as in the Lublin ghetto. They used to undress the young Jewish female prisoners. Then they whipped them and injected them with strychnine. They were laughing as the poor victims were convulsing to death in front of them. There were even rumors that they used to cut up Jewish women and boil them with horse meat to make soap out of them. Heinrich Himmler, as well as Dirlewanger's patron and friend Gottlob Berger, knew about these atrocities and tolerated them. They needed men like Dirlewanger in their fight against the so-called non-Aryan subhumans. In February 1942, the Dirlewanger Brigade was sent to Belarus, where they not only raped and tortured young women, but also killed at least 30,000 Belarusian civilians. Their specialty was to cram the local population inside a barn and then set it on fire. Whoever tried to escape from the burning barn was shot with a machine gun. As with the Einsatzgruppen, which were Nazi mobile death squads operating behind the front line in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe, Dirlewanger's unit made their victims, often naked, kneel down on the edge of a mass grave and then shoot them in the back of the neck with an automatic pistol. Then, the bodies dropped straight into the pit. On the 1st of August 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began, and Dirlewanger and his men participated in its oppression while committing unspeakable crimes. During the uprising, they also took part in the Wola massacre, during which more than 40,000 Poles were murdered in the Wola neighborhood of the Polish capital. This massacre was ordered by Adolf Hitler himself, who requested to kill anything that moves in order to stop the Warsaw Uprising. The Dirlewanger Brigade burned 3 hospitals with patients inside. The nurses were whipped, gang-raped, and hanged naked, together with the doctors. He did not have any mercy, even with children. When they found a daycare with 500 children inside, Dirlewanger ordered his men to kill every one of them. But because he wanted them to save their ammunition, they beat and stabbed the defenseless children to death with rifle butts and bayonets. In the old town of Warsaw, thousands of civilians and prisoners of war, regardless of gender and age, were raped and murdered. Many of them were shot or set on fire with flamethrowers. The Warsaw Uprising lasted 63 days, ending on the 2nd of October 1944. It is estimated that more than 150,000 civilians died in this uprising, which was the single largest military effort undertaken by resistance forces to oppose German occupation during World War II. For his merits in the suppression of the uprising, Oskar Dirlewanger was promoted and was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. In October 1944, Dirlewanger and his men played a crucial role in the brutal suppression of the Slovak national uprising, and later they took part in fights against the advancing Red Army in Hungary and Germany. After the end of the war, Oskar Dirlewanger was arrested on the 1st of June 1945. Although he was wearing civilian clothes and using a false name, he was recognized by a Jewish former concentration camp prisoner and brought to a detention center. According to the testimony of Luftwaffe Lieutenant Anton Fersing, his cellmate and German prisoner of war, Dirlewanger was pulled out of his cell into the corridor every night and brutally beaten by the Polish guards. Fersing later testified, "I have heard blows and terrible screams. In daylight, I would see bleeding, open wounds on Dirlewanger's face, and his entire body was covered with bleeding welts." After days of immense torture and suffering, Dirlewanger died on the 7th of June, 1945. He was 49 years old when he was brutally beaten to death by Poles in revenge for his brutality in suppressing the Warsaw Uprising. Officially, he died of a heart attack. There were no tears shed for Oskar Dirlewanger. Number 3. Martin Sommer. Martin Sommer's career in concentration camps began at Dachau. Established in March 1933, it was the first regular concentration camp built by the Nazi government. In October 1933, Dachau's commandant, Theodor Eicher, introduced a system of regulations which inflicted brutal punishments on prisoners for the slightest offenses. Eicher ensured that the Dachau camp served as a model for all later concentration camps. It also became a training center or a school of violence for SS guards who were deployed throughout the concentration camp system. One such guard was Martin Sommer, who learned how to torture the prisoners that he supervised and how to get the maximum amount of work out of them whilst they were still alive. In the summer of 1937, Sommer was deployed in the Buchenwald concentration camp, which was one of the largest concentration camps established within German borders. The camp became operational from July the same year. Prisoners lived in the Buchenwald main camp, which was surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, watchtowers, and a chain of sentries outfitted with automatic machine guns. At the entrance to the main camp, there was a notorious punishment block known as the bunker, where prisoners who violated the camp regulations were punished and often tortured to death. One man who was responsible for this punishment block, and who became known as the Hangman of Buchenwald, was Martin Sommer. In the bunker, Sommer kept a secret compartment concealed in the floor under his desk to hide torture instruments and the needles with which he shot carbolic acid and air into the victims' veins. Sommer often laid the dead bodies beneath his bed for the night, where the corpse bearers had to remove them the following morning. One of his specialties was the whipping block, where prisoners were forced to count their strokes aloud as Sommer beat them with a heavy stick. If they lost count, Sommer started again. One man, who was sentenced to 25 strokes and got 60 lashes this way, died on the spot. Another Sommer specialty was hanging prisoners by their wrists from trees. Because of the screams of the victims, this torture method became known as the singing forest. Sommer had a special hatred for priests. On one occasion after beating a German pastor, he hung him naked outside in the winter before throwing buckets of water on him. The pastor froze to death. On another occasion, when a Catholic priest performed the sacrament of penance for a fellow inmate, Sommer beat the priest to death. Otto Moll, an Austrian Roman Catholic priest, fared even worse. In 1938, shortly after the annexation of Austria, he was arrested for attempting to persuade a girl not to be wed to a man of questionable morals. He was then sent first to Dachau and then to Buchenwald. In April 1940, despite suspecting a trap, Neururer agreed to perform a forbidden baptism at the camp for a prisoner who had approached him. After he did, he was sent to the punishment block, where Martin Sommer hung him upside down and then nailed him to a tree. Practically crucified, Neururer did not scream. Instead, he prayed silently. Otto Neururer was left there for 36 hours before being killed by Sommer. Martin Sommer also starved the inmates, hanged them in their cells, poisoned what little food they had, or simply beat them to death with a piece of iron. He also injected phenol, EpiPen, or air into the prisoners' veins. In one case, Sommer is said to have crushed the skull of a prisoner with a screw clamp. On another occasion, when the tied-up prisoner received 25 strokes with a stick on his bare buttocks, Sommer hit him so ferociously and so hard that afterwards he said to his fellow Nazi colleagues that he had blisters on his hands. Sometimes, he even snatched the stick out of the hands of other SS men and continued to hit the inmate if he thought that they were not being hit hard enough. Many of those who were lucky enough to survive his beatings were taken to the infirmary with damaged kidneys. Another of Sommer's specialties was rubbing prisoners' backs with steel brushes and then pouring acid onto the wounds. Sommer's treatment of prisoners was so excessively brutal and sadistic that he was even investigated by the Nazis and put on a trial which sentenced him to a reduction in rank and sent him to a penal battalion fighting on the Eastern Front to redeem himself. In the Soviet Union, Martin Sommer was wounded in a tank explosion, losing his right leg and permanently crippling his right arm. He was arrested by the Soviet Army and released in 1955. After first declaring him unfit for trial, West German authorities changed their minds when Sommer married a blonde nurse in 1956, fathered her child, and casually applied for an increase to his veteran's pension. During the trial, when being shown a photo of prisoners hanging by their wrists from trees, he was asked, "Is that you standing beside the men?" Sommer replied, "No, we did not hang our prisoners so high." Sommer was sentenced to the maximum punishment permitted under West German law, life imprisonment. In 1971, however, Sommer was released from jail because there was no facility to continue the treatment of his war injuries. He was 73 years old when he died in a nursing home on the 7th of June, 1988. There were no tears shed for Martin Sommer. Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.